Los Angeles, a city that we all think of as glitz and glamour, but right now it's shrouded in smoke and fear.
Yeah.
Wildfires are just tearing through those iconic hills and leaving behind just a crazy level of destruction.
Yeah. It's hard to even grasp.
It's hard to grasp, and I think it's easy to maybe just think, oh, a few scorched trees.
Right.
But it's not just that.
No, we're talking like homes completely gone.
Yeah.
Incinerated. Those famous landmarks threatened by these huge walls of flame.
Right.
And thousands of people forced to flee their homes.
Absolutely. And, you know,
You've probably seen the images.
Yeah, you probably see the images of some celebrities, too, like Paris Hilton and Adam Levine.
Yeah, they've lost their homes in these fires.
Yeah, and it really hits home when you see those very familiar faces.
Yeah.
Grappling with the same devastation as everyone else.
Right.
And it's just a reminder that these disasters...
They don't discriminate at all, and the human cost is really heartbreaking.
Yeah.
5 lives already lost and over 130,000 people displaced.
It's staggering.
Yeah.
And then you start to think about the financial impact, and early estimates are saying the damages could be $57 billion.
Wow.
It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
This could end up being one of the most expensive disasters ever.
Absolutely.
But before we really get into specifics,
yes,
if you're interested in this unfolding crisis and want to stay up to date with all of our future analyses, make sure to hit that subscribe button.
Yeah, staying informed is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, especially with a situation that's as dynamic and complex as this.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so let's get into some of the details.
Okay.
Our sources are indicating that the Pacific Palisades, Pasadena, Selmar, Hollywood Hills, and the Acton region have been hit the hardest.
Right.
And even more concerning is that only one of these fires is currently contained.
Right. Yeah. The situation is just incredibly volatile. And of course, firefighters are working tirelessly. But, they're fueled by these strong winds and dry conditions. And it's just a really grim picture of what everyone's dealing with.
We're talking about 1,500 structures completely destroyed.
Wow.
Many of them multi-million-dollar homes.
Yeah.
Imagine entire neighborhoods just wiped off the map.
It's really hard to comprehend that level of destruction.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to remember that beyond these numbers, it's not just about the buildings.
Right.
You know, this is about people's lives.
This is about
families who have lost everything.
Yeah, it's not just property damage.
Right.
This is about communities being shattered and a city reeling from what's likely the worst fire in its history.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a reminder that these types of disasters
have a ripple effect.
Have a huge ripple effect.
Yeah, that goes way beyond the immediate damage.
Yeah, for sure.
We're going to unpack those larger consequences a little bit later.
Yes.
But first, let's try to understand how we got here. You know, we all know that wildfires are a natural part of the ecosystem, especially in California. But what made this particular firestorm so catastrophic?
Well, our sources are pointing to a couple of factors that really created a perfect storm.
Okay.
Southern California has been grappling with a really severe drought for the past 2 decades.
Right.
And then following that, we had a couple of unusually wet years, which led to just this massive surge in vegetation growth.
Oh, wow.
But when those dry conditions returned, all that new growth turned into basically a tinderbox.
Oh, wow.
Just waiting for a spark.
And unfortunately, that spark was found.
Yeah, unfortunately.
There's another layer to this that we can't ignore, and that's the impact of climate change.
Right.
It's pretty clear that the hotter, drier conditions are making these wildfires more frequent, more intense, and much harder to control.
Absolutely. And while the immediate cause of the specific fire is still being investigated, you can just see the fingerprints of climate change all over this.
Right.
The science is very clear. We're seeing a pattern of more extreme weather events, including these megafires. And that trend is just going to continue unless we really take action.
It's a sobering thought. And it leads us to another layer of this crisis, the political fallout.
Yeah.
Our sources mentioned President Biden canceling his trip to monitor the situation.
Right.
Which is a stark contrast to former President Trump's very vocal criticism of California's handling of this disaster.
Yeah, and he's not just making general comments about mismanagement.
Right.
He's specifically alleging that fire hydrants ran dry during this blaze.
Wow.
And he's pointing fingers at policies that prioritize wetlands and wildlife, claiming they've depleted water reserves that could have been used for firefighting.
And then you've got Elon Musk jumping into the fray, criticizing the LA Fire Department for their focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
Right. It seems like everyone's got an opinion on this.
Everyone.
And it's all playing out against this backdrop of a city that's still battling flames. Yep. It's definitely a complex situation. Yeah. And it raises a question for you, our listeners.
Yeah.
Do you think it's appropriate to be having these political debates while the city is still burning?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah. And if this discussion has got you thinking, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a like and let us know in the comments.
Yeah, it is a valid question.
Yeah.
And it kind of speaks to this larger challenge of balancing those immediate needs with these long-term solutions.
Right.
We have this very urgent crisis right now, but we also need to address the underlying issues that led to it.
Right. It's like we're trying to put out a fire while simultaneously figuring out how to prevent the next one.
Exactly.
And speaking of long-term solutions, one thing that keeps coming up is the role of those environmental policies that Trump was criticizing.
Right. He specifically called out policies that prioritize water for wetlands and wildlife.
Okay.
And these policies are part of a larger effort to protect California's diverse ecosystems.
And they involve things like restoring those natural water flows, creating habitat corridors, and limiting development in sensitive areas.
So basically trying to keep those ecosystems healthy.
Right, exactly. The idea is that healthier ecosystems are going to be more resilient to climate change and also provide a whole host of benefits, from clean water to carbon sequestration.
So there's this inherent tension between protecting the environment and, in Trump's view, ensuring adequate resources for firefighting.
Right.
It's a debate that comes up a lot when we talk about climate change.
Yeah.
This idea that environmental protection comes at a cost of either economic growth or, in this case, public safety.
Right. It's a very complex debate and so often oversimplified.
Right.
On the one hand, you have this argument that, strict environmental regulations hinder economic development and potentially limit resources that could be used for things like firefighting.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's also the argument that ignoring climate change and its impact on things like these fires will just lead to far greater costs in the long run.
Yeah, and not just costs in terms of like dollars and cents.
Right.
But, there's a whole ethical dimension to protecting ecosystems and biodiversity.
Yeah, it's about recognizing that intrinsic value of nature.
Yeah.
And understanding that we're all part of this interconnected web of life. But it's also about recognizing that, our actions have consequences.
Right.
And failing to address climate change will ultimately undermine our own well-being.
So where does that leave us?
Well,
we have these immediate devastating fires.
Right.
And then this much larger issue of climate change is kind of looming in the background.
Yeah, it's a crisis on multiple fronts.
It feels like it. And that's what makes this situation so challenging. It's not just about putting out the fires that are burning right now.
Yeah.
It's about figuring out how to prevent or at least mitigate these future disasters that are probably going to become more frequent and more intense as the climate continues to change.
Absolutely.
And that kind of brings us back to that question of responsibility.
Right.
Who needs to take action?
Yeah.
Is it the federal government, the state government, individuals?
It's tricky.
It feels like everyone's pointing fingers.
Yeah, because you have all these different levels of government with different responsibilities and different priorities.
Right.
And then you have individuals who are maybe feeling overwhelmed and kind of powerless in the face of this massive problem.
But we can't just throw our hands up and say it's too big.
Right.
There's nothing we can do.
Yeah. There has to be a way forward.
So what are some potential solutions, or at least steps in the right direction?
Well, on the policy level, there's a lot of talk about investing in more resilient infrastructure. So think, fire-resistant building materials and better early warning systems.
So like being more prepared.
Exactly. And then there's this big push for more aggressive policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to transition to those cleaner sources of energy.
Okay, so those are all big picture things.
Yeah.
What about on a more individual level?
Yeah.
What can people do to at least be more prepared?
Well, there's a lot that individuals can do.
Yeah.
Even simple things like creating what's called defensible space around their homes.
Okay.
So basically clearing brush and other flammable materials away from structures.
It's kind of like creating a buffer zone.
Exactly. A buffer zone, and then also having an evacuation plan in place.
Right.
And just being aware of the risks.
Right. And I imagine staying informed and being engaged in the political process is important too.
Absolutely, because ultimately addressing climate change and building a more resilient future really does require a collective effort.
Yeah, it's a daunting task.
Yeah.
But we can't ignore it.
We can't ignore it.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about the economic impact of these fires.
Okay.
We mentioned earlier that the estimated cost is about $57 billion.
Yeah.
But what does that actually look like?
Well, it's important to remember that that number represents not just the immediate costs of rebuilding what was destroyed, but also the long-term economic consequences.
Right.
So, businesses that have been forced to close, potentially for good, jobs lost, tourism revenue drying up, and just this ripple effect throughout various sectors of the economy.
Yeah, it's easy to focus on the immediate devastation.
Right.
But these fires are really going to have a lasting impact on that region's economic well-being.
Yeah, absolutely.
And speaking of lasting impact, it's hard to ignore the fact that, some pretty high-profile figures have been personally affected by these fires.
Yes. The images of celebrities like Paris Hilton and Adam Levine losing their homes have been circulating everywhere.
Yeah.
And, while it's tragic for anyone to lose their home, it does raise questions about, the visibility of climate change and the different ways people experience these events.
It's easy to dismiss celebrity news as superficial, but in this case, it's a powerful reminder that climate change doesn't discriminate.
Absolutely.
It affects everyone, regardless of wealth or status.
And in some ways, seeing these familiar faces dealing with the same fears and losses as everyone else, it humanizes the issue.
Yeah.
It makes it feel more real and more urgent.
Yeah, it definitely adds a different dimension to the conversation.
Yeah.
But it also raises questions about responsibility and resources.
Right.
Celebrities often have the means to rebuild and relocate.
Much easier.
Yeah, much more easily than the average person. So do you think that creates a different level of urgency for them to address climate change?
That's a good question.
Makes you wonder if their platform and influence come with a greater obligation to speak out about these issues and to advocate for solutions.
It's definitely a complex issue.
Yeah.
And, it's important to acknowledge that shared vulnerability we all face with climate change.
Right.
But we also can't ignore those vast disparities in our ability to cope with and recover from disasters like this.
It speaks to the broader societal inequalities that are often exacerbated by climate change
I'm sure.
and other environmental crises.
Absolutely.
And it brings us to another crucial aspect of this disaster that we need to unpack, and that's the human cost. We've talked about the economic toll, the political battles, and the environmental factors, but at the heart of it all are the people whose lives have been completely turned upside down.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in those big numbers and those policy debates.
Yeah.
But, we can't forget that behind each of those 1,500 destroyed structures, there's a story of loss and displacement and trauma.
Yeah, imagine the stress and anxiety of having to flee your home and not even knowing if you'll have anything to come back to.
Right.
Imagine losing those precious memories, family heirlooms, all those things that make a house a home.
Yeah, and it's not just the immediate impact.
Right.
The emotional scars of these types of disasters can linger for years, even decades. We're talking about potential long-term mental health consequences, the disruption of communities, the loss of livelihoods. It's a ripple effect that extends so far beyond the physical damage.
Yeah, and let's not forget about those who are still on the front lines battling these blazes.
Right.
The firefighters, the first responders, the volunteers. They're putting their lives at risk to protect others.
Yeah.
Working tirelessly in just incredibly dangerous conditions.
They are the unsung heroes of this whole crisis.
Yeah.
And their courage and dedication just deserves immense recognition.
Yeah, and we also need to think about that long road to recovery that lies ahead.
Right.
Rebuilding homes, businesses, and communities.
Yeah, it's going to take so much time, resources, and resilience.
It's a massive undertaking.
It is.
And it's really going to require a collective effort from individuals, communities, government agencies, organizations. It's a time to come together to support those who've been impacted.
Absolutely.
And to work towards building a more resilient future.
Yeah, and as we move forward, we need to start asking some tough questions.
Yeah, what are those?
Like, how can we be better prepared for these types of disasters?
Right.
Which are probably going to become more frequent and intense because of climate change.
Yeah.
What steps can we take to just mitigate the risks?
Right.
To make communities more fire resistant, to protect our most vulnerable populations?
These are all really critical questions, and I think they require some honest conversations.
Yeah.
And a willingness to actually make changes.
Yeah.
We can't just go back to business as usual after the smoke clears.
No, this has to be a wake-up call. This has to be a catalyst for action.
It's a time for reflection, for learning from our mistakes, and taking those concrete steps to create a safer, more sustainable future.
Absolutely. And if these are the types of discussions that get you thinking, hit that like button and let us know in the comments what steps you think we need to take as a society.
Yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts and insights. And as we wrap up this conversation, we want to leave you with a final thought.
Yeah.
This crisis has shown us the power of nature, the fragility of our communities, and the importance of collective action.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we're all in this together and that our choices today are going to shape the world we inherit tomorrow.
For sure.
And if you found this conversation insightful and want to stay informed about future analyses, be sure to subscribe to our channel. We're going to continue to dive deep into these really critical issues that are impacting us all, and we always appreciate your engagement.